Hi, so the assignment this week is plaster carving, and hopefully you've all made a plaster brick, but if not, you now have the tools on how to mix and create plaster castings, and you can just even pour them plaster into some kind of disposable tray or cup to make yourself a plaster brick for this next project. You may also default to the large pieces of chalk that were included in your kit and use one of those to carve. What you are seeing right now is just a Google search for plaster carving. This is particularly high schoolers that have done plaster carving. It is a fairly traditional method for creating sculpture. And I will be showing you how to go about doing it. But first, we're going to look at the artwork of Diem Chow, who is a Vietnamese-born artist who has lived in Seattle since 1986. And she is a well-known artist for a lot of different mediums and really exceptional work. But one thing that I think that really stands out in her work or is something that is very recognizable is her crayon carving. So a very similar process, although crayon is more like carving wax than it is like chalk. However, I'm going to show you these works since there's a very similar method here. So she creates these crayon drawings. She even leaves a little bit of the paper of the crayon on the bottom. And they're really incredible and intricate and detailed. And I've actually seen very similar things done out of chalk carving. So just to give you kind of a little bit of a view of what you can do. This is called reductive sculpture. So there's additive sculpture and there's reductive sculpture. And additive sculpture is where you add materials. Say like clay, you start with a lump and you add more clay and more clay. So you're adding things to it. Reductive is when you start with an object and you carve away or cut away to reveal something in that form. She also does these really sweet little commissions too. So now we're going to look at some of the materials and methods for chalk carving. Hello, welcome to plaster carving. So first I'm going to show you guys, if you haven't already released your pieces from the mold, you can either, sometimes it will be as easy as that, just kind of pushing them back and then carefully peeling away your Play-Doh to reveal a little mold that, or a cast, I'm sorry, the mold is the, would be the Play-Doh in this respect. The cast is the remnants, the plaster that has been shaped, that has dried in a certain form. This one's going to be a little bit harder, slightly more difficult when it's in a rounder cup. So I can either just kind of break the seal there. You can also get in there with the scissors and just kind of ever so carefully, please be careful of your hands, but cut apart the mold to make it easier to get things out. Oops. If you're rough the way I just was, and you have a thin base, you might find that your base breaks apart. That's okay. Remember, we are given extra points for effort here in remote learning, so don't despair. And I'm going to slowly pull the plaster. Oh, I did a terrible job. So this is what my hand looks like. Nothing like my previous cast. For this one, this was the one, remember, where I got a lot of Play-Doh, so I can kind of see the hand, and that's all right. Your teacher right now is demonstrating that even epic failures are okay. So that is I can kind of see some of the fingers, but that is my unsuccessful, I have done it successfully, my unsuccessful mold. I'd say this one is a much better example. But it happens, and I'm okay with that. If it's a, lump of plaster that showed that you really tried, I am 100% proud of you. It's really the trying and the experience that are the important things. So now that you, and you might find that you have, and these, if you see, you notice I put paper down again. This isn't quite the same. This isn't a wet project, but it's a dusty project. So having paper down is just a nice thing to do for any surface you're working on, especially if you're working on a wood table or something kind of nicer. Having, you might not all have like a work table like this, so having something that you can just kind of get a little messy on, and that's why you got the brown paper. This was the remainder of my plaster that I put into a cup, so that I had a nice mold or a nice chunk of plaster to work with for carving. If you don't have something like this, you either need to mix up the second batch of plaster and just pour it in really anything, depends on what shape you want to use. You can pour it into something like this if you want a nice long brick. You can pour it in a cup, or you can use the chalk that I provided you. You should have 2 pieces of chalk that you can also use to carve. So the next thing you have to do is go find a bunch of materials to carve with. So these are things you have in your kit: a utility knife. We're going to go over safe practices with this. I recommend you have a pencil. I would also recommend that you get your pliers and wire, because you can make yourself little tools, and I'll show you that in a minute. If you have a butter knife that it is okay, that you have cleared, is okay for this project. It generally does not mark the knife and it's washable. Don't use your nice silver though for this, but if you have just a good old-fashioned stainless steel butter knife that you've gotten family approval to use, you may use that. I also have a screw. This has a nice sharp pointed end, and an emery board. So if you have any kind of emery board or other kind of nail tools, those also work great. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be carving a figure. So if you have something like this, you're going to wind up doing a relief. That is the same as this right here. This is a relief for both cameras. The relief is a flat surface in which there is a raised portion that is of some kind of image or thing, whereas a carving in three-dimensional form is in the round. What you're going to want to do first is kind of rough out what you're trying to get. Think about the brick you have, the block you have. Try to envision what it is you want it to look like at the end. And then with your pencil, draw out. So I'm going to actually, let's say I'm going to make a mouth. Wondering if it's going to be hard to see. I'm going to make a mouth, a nose. My mouth is actually way too big. And I'm going to make some eyes. Roughly in the right spot. This stuff's getting carved away, so it's okay. Or, I could do it on here where I think about the head, more the body shape. This is going to be the head, the shoulders, and then the legs. And the pencil is even actually carving away. The chalk is much softer, just to warn you, which might sound like an easier carving, but remember that it also means it's brittle and it can break. And once again, if you turn in some shards that have broken, but it shows that you've done, a good 2 to 4 hours of work carving, I am satisfied. So the first thing we're going to do is think about our tools. What are the best ways to extract? So we're going to rough out this shape. I'm going to start reducing. So this is reductive sculpture, as I mentioned before. Reductive carving practices or reductive sculpting means that you take away. So this was additive. We added material to a mold to make something. If you do paper mache, you are adding. And so it's an additive process. When you have a block of something like wood or plaster or stone, and you reduce it, you take away pieces to reveal a shape, that is a reductive sculptural process. So I have a couple of materials here. The first one I'm going to show you is the knife. We would be using a chisel normally. In the studio, we have plaster chisels. But with this knife, you push it up to where you want it. Do not give yourself a nice long lead like that. That is not safe. You want to just go to the first line where you can see the first blade. You're going to open this part up. That keeps it from sliding in and out. So once you do that, it locks it into place, which is really nice. Then, at no point do you ever hold this and carve towards your body. Never do that. With any of our carving and cutting tools, the rule is that you always carve away from yourself, away from your fingers, away from your body, away from everyone else. And you don't try to gouge it and take out big chunks. So I like to even use my table as a third hand, and I'm just going to use the blade and carefully. Now, if you're going into, if you're doing this on top of a nice table, you might even want to put something like a beat up magazine in between you and the table so that you don't miss and gouge your table. So, see how easy that is? This is really soft. On here, it's a little bit trickier because I'm trying to go on a round space, and I am just carving and reducing that space. And this is good for taking out big chunks. If I wanted to do the eyes, in fact, I'm going to add a little more detail so that I remember not to gouge out the eyes. So I might come in here. So remember, always carve away. Right now, this blade is down here and the other half, the rest of my body is on the upper half. I'm going away from my body. Another tool that you can use, we would have a rasp in the studio, a plaster rasp that would allow us to do it. It's something that looks like a cheese grater, but they use it on plaster. If you have, and actually I tried to order these for you guys, but there's a little Amazon mishap, so they never came. But if you do have an emery board of some kind, this is a great way. This actually takes off less, which is more to your advantage because it's more controlled. You can really work ever so slowly and patiently and get these nice rounded areas. It might get kind of full up with plaster every now and then, which means that you just have to go back every now and then, kind of clean it off. If you have, it disappeared. If you have sandpaper, you can just get yourself a little piece of it. Same thing. It'll be a little bit beefier, generally, depending on the grit you have. The higher the grit, that means the smaller the sand, the more sand there is per inch. So if it's a higher number, this is, what is this? Oh, I tore it off. But this is kind of a medium grit sandpaper. So if you have sandpaper, feel free to use that. If you don't, it's okay. The next thing you can use a butter knife. See, it's also getting quite a bit of the plaster off. It's very satisfying. And even with the plaster, the butter knife, I'm going away from myself. The reason being is because I normally do this in the wood shop, but now's my chance now. I have all of these. Knock on wood. I have all of these because I am very, very, very careful. When I use tools, I come very present, and I also train myself, so I try not to get in bad habits, even with something as benign as a butter knife, because I've watched even the simplest tools hurt people, and I also want to keep that muscle memory working in a way that keeps me safe, so that if I stop and drop this for a minute because I got something smaller, I don't suddenly switch. My muscles aren't trained to go this way. It's not to say that I haven't been stupid and made mistakes and cut myself before, because I have. But I try to keep my muscles trained in a way that allows me to pick up a new tool and still think in terms of carving away. So I am just gently working on this slowly. Oh, see, now. As soon as I even kind of brushed my finger right away, I knew I was doing something wrong. The next thing you can use is just something pointed. This is just a drill bit that I found. It can help me go in and kind of even clear some space. If I go in and draw around part that I want, I've already messed up my nose, but that's okay. It'll be crooked like the real thing. If I draw around this, it actually kind of makes it easier if I've kind of drawn the pathway to then go back in. And this is something that's very true in wood, but also true in plaster, is now I can go back in and start clearing out that area. These are very little strokes because we're not carving something big like wood. The next thing you can do, the final tool, is to make your own tool. So we've done this before with our bubble tools, and now we know how to make something that's nice and sturdy. Maybe I just want a little sharp thing to go in and draw with. And actually this is really nice because it's super fine. It's much finer. And I'm just right now, I'm kind of just scratching away, trying to reduce the stuff around the features in the face. And then I'll just start trading up between the tools. So, I hope you enjoyed that musical interlude. I just thought it was better than total silence. And also, I hope that you realize that your teacher is not the most talented at reductive carving. And from the little bit I've already seen of the plaster casting, I know that you guys will do much better than I did. But your assignment that is due the day before our first class next week is use a plaster brick that you cast or the chalk that I supplied you to carve a human or an appropriate part of a human in either relief or in the round. So remember, relief is that it's still sort of encased in a larger brick or surface, and you've revealed or you've carved away sort of the outside parts of that surface so that the hand, the face, whatever it is that you want, foot merges. Or you can carve it around like you saw that I did with the chalk, where the entire thing becomes the human figure. Create a, you'll need to gather tools to help you do this, and I've given you a lot of suggestions in this video. And then I want you to create an area to carve where you have protected all the surfaces, so lay out paper, and if you need to, wear an apron, and that you practice safe methods for carving. Your carving is due uploaded in the week 7 voice thread by midnight the night before your first class next week.